Hans, these are fascinating parallels between the medieval commender, after which you named your firm, of course, and modern private equity. Can you tell us a little bit more?
I was studying history and doing research in the history of bankruptcy. Among the assets of some bankrupt Florentine banks, I found those commenders. And after uncovering my school Latin and reading those contracts, I was amazed how similar they were to the LPAs I was concerned with in my everyday work. And I went to my professor, and he liked to tease me because I was one of his older students. And he said, Hansi, that's again so clever. If you can explain to me the difference, where those similarities come from, you come back. And so I came back a year later, and kind of the theory to explain those similarities is historical institutionalism, where you use history as kind of a laboratory to better understand modern institutions.
How widespread was the commender structure?
More or less, that's the amazing thing, unchanged over the oldest proofs I found are in the 6th century, imagine, and it goes all the way to the 14th century. So we are talking 600-700 years. In fact, Muhammad's wife, Khadija was her name. Her father was a venturer. And so it's more or less venture finance that financed his ascent to become a political and religious leader. So it was always this profit. The important factors was the profit share. It was in those days 25%, and it was always 25%, as it is always 20% now. That's an interesting topic we might talk about a little later. Very important is limited liability, because otherwise a Venetian family couldn't take other people's money to invest, because if they would have lost the money without the limited liability, the whole family would have gone bankrupt, and they would kind of be expelled out of Venetian society. So limited liability, if you want, is the second important ingredient. And the third is the limited duration of those venture finances. It was then for one caravan, for one project, for one voyage, like it is today, mostly for 10 years, and for very similar reasons, because thus the investor had the opportunity to decide if he wants to reinvest in the next project or not. And on the other side, the general partner was very much motivated to perform, because otherwise he wouldn't have gotten any money in the future.
Before we look at some of the specific structural aspects and linking them across, can we just step back and in very simple terms explain, who in this analogy is an LP and who in this analogy is a GP, and what typically are the GPs doing?
The projects I was most concerned, and probably that's the majority, were the sea voyages across the Mediterranean Sea. So a ship had to be built or chartered or bought, and it had to be equipped with a large crew. Mostly it was galleys in those days. And so they would go typically from Venice to Alexandria in Egypt, and then to Constantinople, do their trades, and come back after several months or even a year if they got stuck during winter. GPs were the merchants on board. Sometimes the captain was also a GP. And the LPs were on one hand the aristocracy, but it is amazing to see that it was really a retail business there then. So there were nuns invested, and the church was invested. A typical ship, and the ships went in convoys in later days, was like a large fund with many LPs going for a multiple month expedition. In Venice, it is shown that that regulation was a prerequisite for the rise of the commanders. Before, they had something called sea loans. And sea loans had this limited liability. If the ship would go under or would be taken by pirates, but it had a fixed interest. But the big difference, and this is what I'm aiming at, is the accounting for a sea loan is so much easier than for a commander or a limited partnership, because for a sea loan, you just have to return the principal plus the interest, and that's it. But for a commander or a limited partnership, you have your income, you have the cost, you have to bribe the customs official, you have to have security and everything, and in the end, you do the profit share. And especially in those days, and today in some areas as well, it was too much of a moral hazard for the GP. And so what Venice did is they regulated kind of the whole voyage of the money and the goods. And only then, when the investors were confident enough that everything is going to be fair and accounted for, there was a sudden rise in around 1240, 1230, where you can see that the sea loans were reduced. Most of 80% of the investments were commander, and this with a very large volume. So it's a very larger volume. So it's a nice story how regulation can create an environment for venture investing to thrive.